Well, ladies and gentlemen, another day in retarded nonsense, because whenever I read the news these days, I just have to shake my head because the news is just, frankly retarded, and retardation has gone global. But before we get on to the main video of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It really does help. And if you'd like to support the work that I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. Link is in the description box below. So let's get on to the first news story, and this actually is a news story around the BBC. Now, we often talk about what mainstream or legacy media does in terms of fabrications of stories. And as time's going by, this is becoming more prominent. More people are starting to realize just how much legacy media is distorting the facts. Now, a lot of people will ask the questions as why this is important. Well, it's important because the same things happen in South Africa. It just happens that because the South African media environment is a lot smaller than the international media, well, the actual things that they do don't come to light as freely and as regularly as they do abroad. But rest assured, these things are occurring on both sides of the continent. In any case, let's look at the first allegation. This is that the BBC doctored Trump's speech. Now, an internal leaked whistleblower memo accused the BBC's Panorama of editing Donald Trump's speech to make it seem as though he was inciting the Capitol riot of January 6th, the mostly peaceful protest that occurred with the most secure and effective election of all time. You remember that one. Anyway, the program reportedly sliced two unrelated parts of the speech, one about peacefully and patriotically protesting, and another 40 minutes later about fight like hell to imply a violent intent. And as you know, this was all used to defame Donald Trump for the longest time. And some individuals still claim that he incited a coup or a attempted overthrow of the government. Now, a whistleblower who is part of BBC's Internal Standards Committee compiled a 19-page dossier, documented editorial misconduct, and Boris Johnson called the revelation a total disgrace, whilst many opposition MPs demanded a formal inquiry into editorial malpractice, because what we're starting to see is this form of malpractice where left-wing ideology is pushed by discrediting the right-wing individuals is becoming more prevalent. Now, many critics are arguing that this has damaged the BBC's reputation for impartiality and could undermine the public's justification for the license fee, although I, for one, would suggest that the license fee needs to be done away with because the BBC for the longest time has no longer been independent news, but rather a mouthpiece news in terms of left-wing biasness. Now, where we've also seen this is that another leaked report has come out about the BBC. And this one was entitled the Prescott Report, which exposed systematic bias within BBC Arabic, accusing it of pushing Hamas lies around the world. Now, the Arabic service allegedly minimized Israeli suffering and gave unverified airtime to Hamas claims about Gaza casualties. Now, one guest who publicly said Jews should be burned as Hitler did appeared 244 times on BBC Arabic, and another who called Jews devils appeared over 500 times on BBC Arabic. Now, Ofcom ruled that a BBC Two documentary, Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, was materially misleading and had been narrated by the son of a Hamas official. A former BBC TV director, Danny Cohen, said that this proves that the BBC knowingly spread anti-Semitic hate, calling for the resignation of top executives, which include the Director General, who's Tim Daly. But you see, the problem is, this is what we're seeing now with legacy media. They will take an issue, they will conflate it, and then they will push a message. It is no longer independent news. It is systematic bias. It's messaging which they are pushing. The problem is in places like South Africa, we generally tend to pick up those news articles, amplify it in the local news, and then the local news kind of pushes the narrative down locally. Because that's typically how these things go, and is causing huge problems globally for the integrity of news. Now, many of you might say, shilling for Israel again, but actually that's not the point. The actual point is that it is nothing more than a way to illustrate the biasness and the problematic nature of legacy media. And that's really what you should take from this. Now, in another news article, as you will recall, there's this thing going on at the moment called the police capture. And the police capture is looking into the ways that the ANC has captured the policing service. Now, the acting police minister has admitted that corruption within the police ranks is widespread. But he insists that this is international. It's not just South Africa, so that makes it okay. Now, he insisted that South Africa must still tackle it internally, and he singled out procurement and tender processes as the biggest source of corruption within SAPS, and this is something I've talked about over the last few days. And ultimately, his remarks followed a briefing to Parliament's Police Portfolio Committee, where audit outcomes exposed irregular spending. But you see, here's the problem. You can't just say, well, our police service is corrupt, but don't worry, it's corrupt worldwide. Yes, we know that a lot is occurring in terms of procurement and tender processing. That's where a lot of the police corruption occurs because of irregular spending. And so that's okay. Because the problem is when you have corruption in the police service, it degrades the integrity of it. Now, why is that important? Well, because as you know, the lunatic government that we have will say things to us such as, you and I should not be allowed to administer self-defense and protect our own lives and family. We must rely on the state to do it. We must give our firearms to them. Don't worry, they're not corrupt, even though we know they will sell it to a corruption gang. We must trust our lives, our businesses, our families to the integrity of the police, even though they're telling us they know that they're corrupt and could easily be bought off, such that you and I could be assassinated, and they just pay off an official. And he's like, yeah, fine, Johnny Walker Blue Label, off you go. Right? This is causing problems for the public because we know that the police are corrupt, they cannot be trusted, and they're telling us that they cannot be trusted. And yet they still want us to somehow trust with our lives and safety? It's a joke. It's a proper joke. And if this is a global problem, it's a global joke. It's not just South Africa. They're all a joke. Anyway, many critics are arguing that this entire normalization of corruption rhetoric risks excusing local failure and eroding accountability. And there's a large degree of truth in that, because what we are seeing is that many of these individuals just go, oh, it's a problem, it's an international problem, we've all got it. It's a bit like the old COVID narrative of we're all in it together, ergo, who cares if you're all suffering? Don't worry, we're all in the gas chambers together, so assume we'll all be dead, and it's okay, because we're all in the same place. This is the stupidest argument ever. And where we've actually seen it quite recently is actually in the Transport Minister, Barbara Creecy, who's revealed that PRASA is still spending 7.5 billion rand in refurbishing old grey and yellow trains that they themselves admit will never be used. I mean, it's a great gig if you can get it. You refurbish old trains that are like completely demolished. They're never going to hit a train track, so like, who cares how well you renovate the trains, I suppose. So despite paying 2.5 billion to contractors already, many of these refurbished trains remain dumped in depots across the country. So we've got these nice trains that have all been refurbished, and they're just going to rot again. They're sitting in depots rotting. Now, this review comes off the public outrage and DA pressure around the contracts awarded to refurbish these trains, which was signed in 2022. Do not forget, this was a Cyril signed contract and will remain active until 2027. Now, this continues a pattern of state-owned enterprises mismanaging entities and trying to use contracts in order to enrich individuals, spending taxpayer money on things that will never, ever improve, benefit, or be of any advantage to you and I, the members of the public. We've seen this in Eskom, Transnet, and now we're seeing it in PRASA. And you'd think that they know full well that 7.5 billion is being spent on trains that are never going to be used. They just cancel the contract. They just go, let's not waste the money. Not the ANC, because I'm pretty sure that some ANC cadre somewhere is probably benefiting from that. At least that's just a hunch. It's just an allegation. I don't know that because I haven't investigated it enough. pretty sure if I did, I'd probably find it. Now, in any case, let's move swiftly on, because the International Trade Administration Commission has found that China has dumped steel-coated sheets into South Africa, undercutting local productions, and that's actually causing our industries to collapse. Now, remember, we're often told by the government that they know they are destroying the state, but that's fine, because China will step in, and then the entities that they've destroyed, the government that is, will somehow be revived in a Chinese guise. And as I've said many times, China isn't an importing economy. They don't want to buy from you, they want to export to you. And we are now seeing that China is deliberately attempting to destroy the steel industry in South Africa by subsidizing the actual steel sheets that are being sent to South Africa. Because they know if they subsidize it long enough and if they sell these things cheap enough, they will destroy the local sectors. So they're actually doing this on purpose. So our friends, the guys who will rescue us, are destroying us deliberately. And we think it's a good thing because for today we got something cheap, even though tomorrow not going to be that cheap anymore when they've managed to successfully destroy our local industries. So despite acknowledging the harm to the South African steel industry sector, the regulator has refused to impose any form of provisional duties, citing recent safeguard measures. And nobody really knows what those are. Basically, the regulator doesn't want to actually stop this from occurring, so the government is complicit. Now, this move is drawing criticism from industrialists who say South Africa's trade policy is paralyzed. It's too slow to act whilst jobs are being lost, because this is what happens with the government. They don't want to upset trade partners. They don't want to put South Africa first. The industries in South Africa get destroyed. They act paralyzed, and when they get destroyed, they also back going, "Haibo, how did that happen?" And everybody else says, "We saw it happening in real time, and you were the ones that did nothing about it." Now, how do we see this in reality? Well, we can actually see it in reality in stories such as the next one. And this is the story that the health minister, moron, and I really dislike this guy, said that South Africa has two brutally different healthcare systems. He says one for the rich and one for the poor. Now, he said this at the Global Council on Inequality, AIDS and Pandemics, where he argued that the NHI and the National Health Insurance is essential to reduce inequality and prepare for the next global pandemic. So basically, it's a commie idea of equality, but this, as you and I know, isn't how we do it. We don't bring everybody up, we bring everybody down. So we destroy the health industry and then we say, well, everybody's equal in the mess that we've created. Now, the report he cited does warn that without reform, South Africa will be unprepared for the next pandemic in roughly 10 years. It's amazing how they already know when it's going to occur. We never knew them before. I mean, for the majority of my life, I never saw one. Now we can just be like, yeah, it's going to happen every 10 years. What, lockdown every 10 years? It's almost like Bandizan. Anyway, critics warn that state inefficiency and corruption could make the NHI another Prasa-style disaster, because we have a brain. And we know how the ANC will probably use the funds for stupid junk, like buying loads of COVID vaccines, that they then later have to dump because nobody used them. Who cares? It's not their money, it's yours and mine, it's our taxes. The whole thing's retarded. And then we can actually see just how retarded the healthcare sector in South Africa has got. Because the International Organization for Migration, the IOM, I didn't know they were a thing either, condemned Operation Dudula and other groups from blocking undocumented migrants from clinics, saying it could spread infectious diseases. Now, the High Court ruled that such actions were unlawful and xenophobic, and the IOM officials said that they are engaging both community activists and the South African government to promote public health education and combat xenophobia at grassroots levels. This is all because we have an estimated 1 million Zimbabweans living in South Africa, and the issue remains a flashpoint between public health and nationalist populism, with parties such as Gator McKenzie, the PA, suggesting, well, the Zimbabweans should footsuck and go back to Zimbabwe and deal with their own healthcare system, because our healthcare system at the moment cannot cater with the local nationals. To take on undocumented migrants and stretch our budget even further just seems ludicrous, but as I've said before, The South African government likes to follow UN narratives, and that's why I bang on about the whole Israeli thing and the way that the UN carries on about that, many of it also being complete lies, because you can see South Africa likes to follow UN claptrap. And this is a UN claptrap, open borders, highly left-wing program. And it is having a massive, massive impact on the South African healthcare sector, and not a very good one. And you can see even our courts are saying that somehow we should help unlawful individuals in the country. So that's people breaking the law to be here. And we must somehow give them healthcare system at our cost. And we must somehow give them healthcare at our cost, because alternatively it could be a pandemic. Yeah, you make this make sense. It's just retarded. Now, talking of retarded, let's move on to the very final news story. And this is the news story around the Nigerian Christian massacres and Trump's reaction. Because in Nigeria, militants have burned over 100 Christian villages alive, continuing a wave of faith-linked massacres. Now, the atrocity prompted Donald Trump to threaten U.S. military intervention, declaring he'd go in guns blazing if Nigeria failed to stop the killings. Because you see, that's what happens when you see an actual genocide. Now, analysts are warning that this rhetoric could further destabilize an already fragile region split between Christian and Muslim communities. Now, I would highlight that the actual friction only comes from one side of the spectrum, and it ain't the Christians. Now, what we see in Nigeria is that there are many Islamist groups that are vying to get rid of anybody who doesn't follow their specific creed. And again, this is why I talk on this topic so much, because you could see in the future similarities that occur in South Africa and in many instances even the Western world. Now, Senator Cruz has introduced a bill to sanction Nigerian officials complicit in religious violence, marking a new U.S. foreign policy flashpoint tied to religion and human rights. And we've seen stuff very similar in the way that the US is treating the anti-Semitic tropes of the ANC government and the anti-Semitic bills that they put forward in order to sanction ANC officials who are complicit in anti-Semitic rhetoric. What do you think of that? Let me know in the comment section. I actually watched the video that Trump did. He did a whole video showing the might of the US. And in it, he had the Our Father being said in the background. It was pretty something to watch, and reminds you that America, for all the doomsayers, is still a powerhouse and it still has a role to play globally. In any case, that's the news of today. Do let me know what you think in the comments. Until tomorrow, bye.